Vaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiriye Nashtuprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavati Uttam Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naistiki. So continuing with the discussion on Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 5, Chapter 11, Jad Bharat instructs King Rahugana. Text number 6 onwards. Dukkham sukham vyatiriktam chativram kalopapannam phalamavyanakti alingya maya rachitantaratma swadehinam samsriti chakrakutaha. The materialistic mind covering the living entity's soul carries it to different species of life. This is called continued material existence. Due to the mind, the living entity suffers or enjoys material distress and happiness. Being thus illusioned, the mind further creates pious and impious activities and their karma, and thus the soul becomes conditioned. Mental activities under the influence of material nature cause happiness and distress within the material world. Being covered by illusion, the living entity eternally continues conditioned life under different designations. Such living entities are known as Nitya Baddha, eternally conditioned. On the whole, the mind is the cause of conditioned life. Therefore, the entire yogic process is meant to control the mind and the senses. If the mind is controlled, the senses are automatically controlled, and therefore the soul is saved from the reactions of pious and impious activities. If the mind is engaged at the lotus feet of Lord Krishna, the senses are automatically engaged in the Lord's service. When the mind and senses are engaged in devotional service, the living entity naturally becomes Krishna conscious. As soon as one always thinks of Krishna, he becomes a perfect yogi, as confirmed in Bhagavad Gita. This antaratma, the mind, is conditioned by material nature. As stated here, Maya rachitantaratmana atma sodehinam samsriti chakrakuta. The mind, being most powerful, covers the living entity and puts him in the waves of material existence. So mind just plays very, very tricky games. This is what even Arjuna says to Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. It's very difficult to control this mind. It's very obstinate, very stubborn. I can control a raging wind, but mind, it's very difficult to control. And Krishna says, by practice and by detachment, abhyas and vairagya, one can control this tricky mind. And because of this mind, we keep on taking birth, because it is uncontrolled. And what is mind? It's just one energy of Krishna. And it's a material energy. It's not even spiritual. But it's so stubborn, so difficult to control that it even controls the soul. Soul is supposed to control the mind, but 99.9% times it happens the other way around. So the whole yogic process is to control the mind, is meant to control the mind. By, of course, the bhakti process is by engaging it in the service of Krishna. Otherwise, it's very, very difficult. Just to give an example, one of our relatives right now is very sick for the last 5-6 years. Very, very sick. And there is no chance of recovery. None whatsoever. Doctors have all given up. Now, the mind, how it plays games is, in her mind, the only, I was checking the um, bond or connections or cords. The connection is her connection with her son, which is natural for a mother. So because of that, it's very difficult to leave the body. Now, for a devotee, even if it's a neophyte devotee, it would be still easier to understand. These cords are connected, and I should better get connected with Krishna. Attachment should be towards Krishna, and let him take care of these attachments, material attachments. But it's so difficult. You cannot preach to them. You can just pray to Krishna to just let her move on. But it's very difficult, very difficult. Tavanayam vyavahara sadavihi kshetragya sakshyo bhavati sthula sukshma tasman mano linga mado vadanti guna gunatvasya paravarasya. The mind makes a living entity within this material world wander through different species of life. And thus a living entity experiences mundane affairs in different forms as a human being, demigod, fat person, skinny person, and so forth. Learned scholars say that bodily appearance, bondage, and liberation are caused by the mind. Bodily appearance. So bodily appearance, because the subtle body, so howsoever we have the subtle body, the gross body takes the shape accordingly. Bondage and liberation are caused by the mind. Just as the mind is the cause of bondage, it can also be the cause of liberation. The mind is described here as per hour. Para means transcendental and hour means material. When the mind is engaged in the Lord's service, it is called para, transcendental. When the mind is engaged in material sense gratification, it's called avara or material. At the present moment, in our conditioned state, our mind is fully absorbed in material sense gratification. But it can be purified and brought to its original Krishna consciousness by the process of devotional service. We have often given the example of Ambarish Maharaj, Sarvai Manaha, Krishna Padaravidyo. The mind must be controlled in Krishna consciousness. The tongue can be utilized to spread the message of Krishna and glorify the Lord or take prasad, the remnants of food offered to Krishna. Sevan mukhehi jivado. When one utilizes the tongue in the service of the Lord, the other senses can become purified. As stated in Narad Pancharatra, Sarvapati Vinirmuktam. When the mind and senses are purified, one's total existence is purified, and one's designations are also purified. One no longer considers himself a human being, a demigod, a cat, dog, Hindu, Muslim, and so forth. When the senses and the mind are purified and one is fully engaged in Krishna's service, one can be liberated and return home back to Godhead. So the process is so simple actually. Just mind must be controlled in Krishna consciousness. Oh, it is so difficult, so difficult, because for millions and millions of births, our mind has been playing games. And the same subtle body, mind, intelligence, false ego, it carries on, goes on with the soul. So how to control the mind? Just engage again and again, over and over in the service of Krishna. And then there's some chance that it will be controlled. but most of the time it will be not controlled. And this is what Prabhupada, when the senses are mind and purified, and one is fully engaged in Krishna's service, means knowledge acquiring senses, working senses, and the mind, and they engage fully in Krishna's service, one can be liberated and return home back to Godhead. Otherwise, the same mind will keep us here in the material world. And because this was one of the comments by Maharaj Rahugana, that you don't look like very strong person. So this is what Jad Bharat is saying. Mind, the living entity experiences mundane affairs because of the uncontrolled mind, and he thinks of himself as a fat person or a skinny person and so forth. So it's all the question of mind. Gunanuraktam vyasanaya jantuhu kshemaya nirgunyam atho manasya yatha pradeepo घृत वर्तिमश्नन शिखा सधूमा भजति हन्यदास्वम पदम तथा गुण कर्मानुबद्धम वृत्तिर मनः श्रेयते अन्यत्र तत्वम. When the living entity's mind becomes absorbed in the sense gratification of the material world, it brings about his conditioned life and suffering within the material situation. However, when the mind becomes unattached to material enjoyment, it becomes the cause of liberation. When the flame in a lamp burns the wick improperly, the lamp is blackened, but when the lamp is filled with ghee and is burning properly, there is bright illumination. Similarly, when the mind is absorbed in material sense gratification, it causes suffering. And when detached from material sense gratification, it brings about the original brightness of Krishna consciousness. It is therefore concluded that the mind is a cause of material existence and liberation also. Everyone is suffering in this material world because of the mind. It is therefore proper to train the mind or to cleanse the mind from material attachment and engage it fully in the Lord's service. This is called spiritual engagement. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, one who engages in full devotional service, who does not fall down in any circumstance, at once transcends the modes of material nature and thus comes to the level of Brahman. We should engage the mind fully in Krishna conscious activities. Then it will be the cause of our liberation, for our returning home back to Godhead. However, if we keep the mind engaged in material activities for sense gratification, it will cause continuous bondage and will make us remain in this material world in different bodies, suffering the consequences of our different actions. So mind, well, if we analyze, even the subtle body is not living, it is dead, it is material, just like the gross elements. But the subtle elements are just more subtle, that's all. It's not as gross as earth, water, fire, air, ether. So this body that we see, the gross body, it cannot work on its own. Soul has to work through it. But the soul doesn't do on its own. It works through the subtle body. And then the gross body moves. But this subtle body, when it's not in the control, when it is materially motivated, then it does the material activities, which causes more and more bondage. There was this saint in Punjab. His name was Bulle Shah. Some of you must have heard about him. And he was a farmer, but a very great saint, very great devotee also. So once he was working in his farm and he was planting this rice paddy, and somebody went to him and he said, Bulle Shah Manada Ki Pana, means how to control the mind. And Bulle Shah was planting the paddies, and he just while planting, he said, Manda Ki Pana, Etho Putya te Utthe Lana, means just take it off from here and put it there. But for a saint like Bulle Shah, it was easy. Means all he said was take it off from the material engagements and put it in the spiritual engagement. So easy. But the process is very difficult. It's easy to say, but for us, people like us, it's very difficult. But this is the only way. There is not a on and off switch that we can turn it off and that's it. Mind will be controlled. We have to practice, practice, practice. This is what Krishna says. Practice and detachment. Only by that it can be controlled. And the real detachment is attachment to Krishna. Even while practicing, it will play games. It plays games all the time. While practicing, we might think, oh, now it's in control. Now I can do whatever I want. Now I have put on dhoti kurta and I have put on tilak and kantin mala. I have the bead bag and I have taken initiation. Now there is no problem. It's completely under control. I have become a Goswami. My senses are completely under control. They are never under our control. Never. It's so difficult. So difficult. Ekadasha san manaso hi vrittaya akuteha pancha dhiyo abhimana matrani karmani puram chatasam vadanti hekadash veer bhumi. There are 5 working senses and 5 knowledge acquiring senses. There is also the false ego. In this way, there are 11 items for the mind's functions. O hero, the objects of the senses, such as sound and touch, the organic activities, such as evacuation, and the different types of bodies, society, friendship, and personality, are considered by learned scholars the fields of activity for the functions of the mind. The mind is a controller of the 5 knowledge acquiring senses and the 5 working senses. Each sense has its particular field of activity. In all cases, the mind is a controller or owner. By the false ego, one thinks himself, the body, and thinks in terms of my body, my house, my family, my society, my nation, and so on. These false identifications are due to the expansions of the false ego. Thus, one thinks that he is this or that. Thus, a living entity becomes entangled in material existence. And it all happens because of uncontrolled mind. Gandhakriti sparsha rasa shravansi visargaratir yati abhijalpa shilpaha ekadasham swikaranam mameti shayam aham dvadasham ek ahu. Sound, touch, form, taste, and smell are the objects of the 5 knowledge acquiring senses. Speech, touch, movement, evacuation, and sexual intercourse are the objects of the working senses. Besides this, there is another conception by which one thinks, this is my body, this is my society, this is my family, this is my nation, and so forth. This 11th function, that of the mind, is called false ego. According to some philosophers, this is the 12th function, and its field of activity is the body. There are different objects for the 11 items. Through the nose, we can smell, by the eyes, we can see, by the ears, we can hear, and in this way, we gather knowledge. Similarly, there are the karmendriyas, the working senses, the hands, legs, genitals, rectum, mouth, and so forth. When the false ego expands, it makes one think, this is my body, family, society, country, etc. And all basically games of uncontrolled mind. And this is what real Maya is. Maya means which is not, that which is not. We consider ourselves this body and identify with the senses and this and that, which is not. It's all going to be left here. Dravya Sabhavashya Karma Kala Reka Dashami Manaso Vikaraha Sahasrasha Shatasha Koteshascha Kshetragyato Na Mithuna Swataha Sayo. The physical elements, nature, the original cause, culture, destiny, and the time element are all material causes. Agitated by these material causes, the 11 functions transform into hundreds of functions, and then into thousands, and then into millions. So these are all the desires. But all these transformations do not take place automatically by mutual combination. Rather, they are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. One should not think that all the interactions of physical elements, gross and subtle, that cause the transformation of mind and consciousness are working independently. They are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says that the Lord is situated in everyone's heart. As mentioned herein, Supersoul is directing everything. Living entity is also Kshetragya, but the Supreme Kshetragya is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. He is a witness and order giver or sanctioner. Under his direction, everything takes place. The different inclinations of the living entity are created by his own nature or his expectations, and he is trained by the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the agency of material nature. The body, nature, and the physical elements are under the direction of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. They do not function automatically. Nature is neither independent nor automatic. As confirmed in Bhagavad Gita, the Supreme Personality of Godhead is behind nature. And he says in Bhagavad Gita, this material nature is working under my direction, O son of Kunti, and it is producing all moving and non-moving unmoving beings. By its rule, this manifestation is created and annihilated again and again and again and again. So first we have the mind and the senses. The senses working, we think it's working under nature with the three modes of nature, but ultimately it's all controlled by Krishna as Paramatma within our body. So without the sanction of Paramatma, nature cannot move on its own. Nature cannot do anything on its own. And nature means our body also. We think everything is happening automatically, but nothing is automatic. Everything is controlled. Everything is controlled. Kshetragya eta manaso vibhutir jivasya maya rachitasya nityaha avirhita kvapi tirohitascha shuddho vichashte hi avishuddh kartuho. The individual soul bereft of Krishna consciousness has many ideas and activities created in the mind by the external energy. They have been existing since time immemorial. Sometimes they manifest in the awakening state and in the dream state, but during deep sleep, unconsciousness, or trance, they disappear. A person who is liberated in this life, Jivan Mukta, can see all these things vividly. As stated in Bhagavad Gita, Kshetragyam Chapi, there are two kinds of Kshetragya or living beings. One is the individual living being, and the other is a supreme living being. The ordinary living being knows about his body to some extent, but the supreme Paramatma knows the condition of all bodies. The individual living being is localized, and the supreme Paramatma is all pervading. In this shloka, the word Kshetragya refers to an ordinary living being, not the supreme living being. This ordinary living being is of two kinds, Nitya Baddha or Nitya Mukta. One is eternally conditioned and the other is eternally liberated. The eternally conditioned, eternally liberated living beings are in the Vaikuntha Jagat, the spiritual world, and they never fall into the material world. Those in the material world are conditioned souls, Nitya Baddha. The Nitya Baddhas can become liberated by controlling the mind because the cause of conditioned life is the mind. When the mind is trained and the soul is not under the mind's control, the soul can be liberated even in this material world. When it is liberated, one is called Jivan Mukta. A Jivan Mukta knows how he has become conditioned. Therefore, he tries to purify himself and return home back to Godhead. The eternally conditioned soul is eternally conditioned because he is controlled by the mind. The eternally conditioned soul is eternally conditioned because he is controlled by the mind. The conditioned state and liberated state are compared to sleeping, unconscious state and the awakened state. Those who are sleeping and unconscious are eternally conditioned. But those who are awake understand that they are eternally part and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. Therefore, even in this material world, they engage in Krishna's service. As confirmed by Srila Rupa Goswami, Iha Yasya Hare Radasya. If one takes to Krishna's service, he is liberated, even though he appears to be a conditioned soul within the material world. In any condition, one is to be considered liberated if his only business is to serve Krishna. So whether we want to remain as Nitya Baddha, eternally conditioned, or we want to move to the real position, the original constitutional position of being a servant of Krishna in Krishna's loka, with him in his service, it's all up to us. So all we have to do is slowly train the mind. And the thing is, the best part is, because that is our constitutional, original, natural position, when the mind is trained slowly, and it starts tasting the bliss, the pleasure in Krishna consciousness, then it don't want to give it up because that is its original position. That's what it's looking for. But when we are not feeling the pleasure, not enjoying it, then the mind will start playing games. So we have to, the one thing that's what I always try to do and I always ask everybody to do is to enjoy the devotional service. Let's not make it a burden. Let's enjoy it. Let's not make it some kind of competition with somebody or play politics or leg pulling or anything. Nothing. It's my relationship with Krishna. And let me enjoy it. That's all. Without bothering anybody, without stepping on anybody's toes, nothing. Let's enjoy. And then when we really enjoy it, Everything, whatever we are doing, whether we are chanting or reading, hearing, taking care of deities or cooking or cleaning, whatever we are doing, just do it in a mood of enjoyment, blissfully. And then when we experience that, we don't want to give it up. We won't want to give it up. So anyway, we'll stop here. See anybody has any questions or comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, Dhanavad Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you so much, Prabhuji. You have very beautifully given the statement that devotion should be done enjoying. It's a very strong statement, actually. If I look back to my own state, and then when I was starting Japa. Initially, I was like taking it kind of burdensome. I mean, like it's a responsibility. I have to do it because it's out of obligation, because it's a spiritual injunction. I have to follow it. So slowly, I realized that this has become little burdensome, and then I was not being able to enjoy, or I was not being able to get the test out of it. But somehow, probably because of taking the association of this class, slowly and gradually I started like counseling my mind itself, saying that I have to accept the things gracefully, the way you are mentioning. I mean, I should enjoy it. I mean, although it is not happening, but constantly I have to keep on telling it to the mind. And then later on, how it turned to 16 rounds, I didn't even realize. So this is a very, very important, statement. I mean, we have to constantly counsel our mind, saying like that, yes, I'm enjoying like that. No? Then only it will happen, or we'll be able to enjoy in devotion.
Yeah.
Like, thank you so much.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Thank you. Any other question or comment? Okay, so I guess we can stop here. You all have a safe and wonderful day. Hare Krishna. Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Hare Krishna. Thank you, Prabhuji.
Jai Srila Prabhupada.